Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Friday. Yay! Bye. That's basically how I'm feeling today. All right, it's Friday, March 3rd, 2023, whatever the hell the year is. Time for another show. We're going to do one, regardless, I guess. It's I have that Friday feeling, and that's the feeling of having to do something all day after I get off of the radio, and probably drive all night, too. So that's not great, but no emergency, nothing wrong, everything's fine. Just that's the plan, and it's starting to weigh on me a little bit. But all right, that's what's going on. There's worse things in the world. Donald Trump could win the presidency again. That would also be horrible. And we could lament that sort of thing. We could tell you what's going on with the former guy and what makes him terrible and why we hate him so much. But you already know that. But believe it or not, there are new angles on that. And, of course, I think I still owe you a George Santos story from yesterday. I mentioned it and then I didn't get to it. But lots happening, and it looks like a lot of stories collecting in pocket this morning about just how fashy it's getting down in Florida and in other places as well, taking their lead. Everybody will be competing. Of course, DeSantis already executing his strategy to be more fascist than Donald Trump in order to try to win the nomination. And down in Texas, Greg Abbott, of course, is going to have to be playing catch-up and following along in DeSantis's lead. I don't know exactly what the strategy is. I mean, he seems to be following in the same lane. And I guess the strategy is, I'm from Texas, and that's different. And I'll win Texas, and you'll win Florida, and then we'll battle it out. And then otherwise, we're largely the same. So I don't know. He seems to be losing the publicity battle, but he keeps striving mightily to copycat DeSantis and do just as fascist and fashy things in Texas, but slower and more evenly paced. I don't know. So we'll see whether that works for him or not. And as I said, plenty of stories to get through here today. Today being Friday, good day to clear out the cash-o stories, not the raft, but the cash-o stories socked away in pocket. I mentioned George Santos. We might as well start with him. The problem with starting with him is, where's that story? I don't know. I have to scroll forever. I thought that was illustrated with a picture of him that I have in my head. There it is. Okay, it has, because of the elimination of previous stories and the addition of new ones, it's switched positions, and that's one of those things. My visual memory of seeing it is, that's displayed over here on the left of the page. It's moved to the right. All right, well, here's what we have in store for you on this one, and I think there's even more now that I think about it. There's, as I recall, there was also some story about his having brought some new people on board, a new treasurer, perhaps, and nobody could figure out who this person was. There was, I guess, no profile on the person and no social media or online presence for this person. Anyway, very weird. But the story I had at hand was more to the scandal point. Mother Jones reporting this one, and let's see if we can't get through it here. Another Santos scandal, Fox ? All right. He diverted voter registration money, now we're finding out, to a Gop-allied gay rights site. That's a small site, and I don't know how much money they need, but they got it from George Santos. Money that was supposed to be going to voter registration drives, I guess. The funds financed a project associated with everybody's favorite Republican gay person, Richard Grenell, like the total hypocritical jerk-ass MFer who comes out of the Trump administration. A top Trump aide, of course, you'll recall, who raised cash for Santos along the way. What do you know? And then he got it kicked back to him, I guess, in the form of money stolen from voter registration drives and sent to him instead. All right, let's see what's up with this. David Korn, Noah Leonard, and Dan Friedman have the byline on this story, and let's get to it. Oh, another battle with the mute button here as I try to disguise a little bit of getting set for the story. All right, never mind. You heard it all. And ready to go here. All right, during Representative George Santos, it's hard to get used to calling him that. Representative George Santos' second run for a congressional seat on Long Island. He lost his first, of course. He helped raise money for and direct a political action committee called Rise New York. We've heard that before, right? That was set up in 2020 under New York state law. Its declared mission was to focus on voter registration, education, and turnout. The PAC collected over $430,000 in donations. What a grift for its operations. Yet Santos, the disgraced Republican fabulist, used a large chunk of those funds, $55,800, for a purpose other than voter registration and engagement, and sent this money to a Washington, D.C. nonprofit to fund a new conservative gay rights site associated with Richard Grenell. It went far, of course. There's all sorts of new gay rights. Everybody knows all about those. Grenell, of course, a prominent gay Republican who served in the Trump administration and who endorsed Santos and helped him gather campaign money. I guess as a quid pro quo. Oh my God, a quid pro quo is here. Write that down. Rise New York was officially headed by Santos's sister, Tiffany, who was listed as its president and on its payroll. Nancy Marks served as the PAC's treasurer, the same role she held on Santos's House campaigns. Rise New York engaged in actions that the New York Times characterized as, quote, unusual, if not a violation, unquote, of law. That's interesting that the of law is outside of the quote. Unusual, if not a violation. Of what? I assume they meant of law, but okay, whatever, however they used the phrase. This unusual, if not a violation thing, which included paying workers for Santos's House campaign. That's an interesting twist as well. As Newsday reported in an expose of Rise New York, it made two payments totaling $5,200 to the landlord of the building where Santos lived in Whitestone, Queens. The PAC also sent $35,000 to Marks and two of her companies, reporting on its campaign filings that these payments were for reimbursement and professional services. When the PAC donated $62,500 each to the Nassau County Republican Committee and the Town of Hempstead Republican Committee, Santos personally handed the checks to Joseph Kagro, the Nassau County Gop chair, an indication Santos had a role with the PAC, though he had no official position with the group. Rise New York is one of the many elements of the bizarre Santos saga that has raised significant questions about his personal ethics and his handling of big amounts of money. One of the top recipients of money from Rise New York was the Liberty Education Forum, a small nonprofit in Washington that is affiliated with the Log Cabin Republicans, an organization of gay Republicans. The donations Rise New York sent to the group had nothing to do with voter registration efforts. According to Charles Moran, a spokesperson for the forum, Rise New York made three payments of $18,600 to support a new project the group started called Outspoken Middle East, an international LGBTQ human rights program. Rise New York also paid the group $1,800 for 3 tickets to its 2021 annual gala. If you like that pronunciation of gala, you can use it. Go ahead. It's not that it's a bad idea, Outspoken Middle East. I don't know how well executed. And given everything else that Trump and his lackey Richard Grenell are involved in, I don't think it was probably not doing a great deal to help people in the Middle East or anywhere else, but it's a nice try. So, it wasn't like he donated to their Fund for Evil or something like that. That might have ended up happening with that money, but who knows? Anyway, Moran, an officer of both the Log Cabin Republicans and the Liberty Education Forum, says that in the summer of 2021, he approached Santos, who was well known within gay Republican circles, and asked if Santos could help fund a program that would provide news coverage of the treatment of gay and lesbian people in the Middle East. We had solicited support from George, as any nonprofit would from people of influence. He wasn't one yet, but okay. Moran notes, he adds, I don't know what formally was George's technical designation with Rise New York PAC. I do know he was involved in some way, shape, or form. Moran did not talk to anyone else at Rise New York PAC about the possible contribution. When the first donation from Rise New York came in, Moran recalls he did not question why a voter registration outfit in New York would send tens of thousands of dollars to a media project focused on gay rights overseas. I did not look at the purpose of the mission of Rise New York. I looked at it legally. It is legal for a state PAC to make a donation to a nonprofit, so I took it. Yeah, and I don't think I'd fault them for that one, really, honestly. I don't know if I would have looked either. Because, first of all, I don't think it matters a great deal. I don't think there's any campaign finance violation in it for the group that's accepting the money. So, and it's not necessary. I don't think it's really their responsibility to look at the mission statements published by every donor and see if it, if it fits. It might be a good idea just for vetting in general. I don't know, but I'm not certain that would have rang any alarm bells. All right, fine, whatever. Brett Capel, a campaign finance lawyer, says that New York, like most states, allows PACs to spend their funds for any lawful purpose short of converting the funds to personal use. Grinnell, who was Trump's ambassador to Germany and then served as his acting, where's my acting button? Acting director of national intelligence, if you can believe it, was one of the initiators of Outspoken Middle East, this project he was having funded. He was also a key endorser of Santos during Santos's successful congressional race. Rise New York made its first $18,600 donation to this initiative, according to its campaign filings, on September 13th, 2021. This was 2 months before Grinnell, a guest columnist for Newsweek, announced the launch of Outspoken Middle East. That's interesting. So he got some insider information or whatever, early information about the launch of this thing. That's not so terrible, but it is a little weird. It certainly speaks to a close relationship, or at least a personal relationship of some sorts between the two of them, and they're both extremely shady characters, so it's not surprising, but there you have it. The project, Grinnell and its editor Chadwick Moore noted in this piece, would provide a news and information platform with translations in Farsi and Arabic, and post articles from a team of LGBTQ plus citizen journalists in Tehran, Kabul, Beirut, and around the region and the world to tell human stories about the realities of being gay in parts of the world that liberals and corporations have left behind. Oh, I see. Yes, that's right. They haven't been forced out or anything by autocratic regimes. No. It's liberals have left us behind. That's the real issue. In the Newsweek article, Grinnell and Moore took credit for launching Outspoken Middle East and assembling its contributors, but Moran says it's not accurate at all to call Grinnell a creator of Outspoken. Outspoken Middle East has noted that Grinnell is an advisor to the project, so he's a fabulous too. No wonder the two of them got together. On October 4th, 2021, Grinnell was the featured guest at a fundraiser for Santos's congressional campaign. In the ensuing 6 months, Rise New York made two more $18,600 donations to the Grinnell-backed enterprise. In July of 2022, Grinnell officially endorsed Santos's congressional bid. The Rise New York donations to the Liberty Education Forum were significant money. In 2020, the last year for which tax returns for this nonprofit are available, the group raised only $106,700. I don't know where the 8 came from. According to Moran, other donors helped fund Outspoken Middle East, but I guess not a whole lot of them. So what did they make? 3 $18,000 donations, and I'm sure the total was mentioned early in the piece, and I've already forgotten. But what's 18 times, $18,600 times 3, $55,800. Oh, there's the 8. All right. So $55,800 out of $106,700. So actually just over half of the money that Outspoken Middle East ever raised came from George Santos and Rise New York PAC. That is a little odd, that part. According to Moran, other donors did, in fact, help fund Outspoken Middle East, just not very much. Oh, no, another half. Maybe it was one other person. Let's see if we can find out. Most of the money that Rise New York pocketed... What? Yeah, okay. So Rise New York got its money. Now we're looking at this part of it, of the equation, from two Republican funders. One was Andrew Intrater. We remember hearing a lot about him early in the George Santos saga. He's a wealthy New York fund manager and cousin to sanctioned Russian oligarch Viktor Vekselberg. At Santos's behest, Intrater also invested hundreds of thousands of dollars with a firm where Santos worked that was accused by the Securities and Exchange Commission of running a Ponzi scheme. Intrater donated $175,000 to Rise New York in several installments across 2021 and 2022. Robert Mangi, M-A-N-G-I, the president of a Long Island-based insurance company, was the other main backer, not the only, but the other main backer of Rise New York, pumping in $150,000. So that's pretty significant between the two of them. $325,000. And did they say anywhere how much Rise New York had going for it? I can't recall. Although now I'm thinking, wasn't there the mention of a $400,000 figure somewhere along the line here? I'm going to scroll back and see if I can find it. Yeah, here we are. The PAC collected $430,000 in donations for its operation. So $430,000 and $325,000 of it is from Vekselberg and this other dude, Robert Mangi. Okay, so that's pretty suspicious in its own right. Good fact to bank for later when more develops. In a statement provided to Mother Jones, Intrater noted that he was surprised to learn that 40% of Rise New York's funding had come from him, and that Santos sent a significant portion of the PAC's funds to a gay rights program in Washington, D.C. While I support gay rights, Intrater's a little mad. While I support gay rights, that's not the purpose for Rise New York that was represented to me. I was told several times that Rise New York funds were going to efforts to register Republican voters in traditionally Democratic voting districts. Well, he says Democrat voting districts, but you know. George introduced me to Rise New York, but I didn't discuss its activities with him after he made the introduction. Until the reports came out indicating that George's sister was involved with Rise, i.e. she ran it, I had no idea George or his people had anything to do with it other than having made the introduction to benefit the New York Republican Party. Plausible. Probably not true, but plausible. In Intrater's telling, Santos hit him up for money for a voter registration project in New York without revealing his close connection to the endeavor, and then used a large amount of the PAC's funds for an entirely different purpose. It sounds likely, too. Intrater has told the New York Times that he has, quote, reached out to the Department of Justice offering information on Mr. Santos, and has also provided information about Santos to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Probably hoping to get sanctions lifted on his, cousin? Mangi did not respond to a request for comment. He told Newsday that Santos was a fraud, adding that donors on all sides of the political aisle will now respond to requests for campaign donations with the question, what do I really know about this person, issue, or PAC? Well, I guess here, in a manner of speaking, you're right. Probably people on both sides of the aisle will now do that. It was apparently the case on the Republican side of the aisle that they did not do that. And, I'm sure there are mistakes made or money too freely given on the Democratic side of the aisle too. But I also think that for the most part, Democrats are perhaps a little more careful with things. Well, you want my money. Well, do I know anything about you or your issue or your PAC? Yes, no, then no money. Yes, still no money, generally speaking, on the Democratic side of the aisle. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Though I'm sure there's some grifty stuff out there too. But naturally he disguises it as, something, both sides. And it's not even an untrue, proposition, but I think he's hoping that people will come away with the impression that what he was really saying is that this happens on both sides of the aisle, which no, not like this. It doesn't. Asked about Santos using Rise New York funds to underwrite this gay rights project, Joseph Murray, an attorney for Santos, said it would be inappropriate to comment on this matter. That's what he usually says. Santos is reportedly being investigated by local, state, and federal authorities. Santos's congressional office, he said it, I stopped reading his quote. It would be inappropriate to comment because ongoing investigation. And then the next sentence just said, yeah, there is an ongoing investigation, several of them. Santos's congressional office did not respond to a request for comment. Neither did Tiffany Santos or Nancy Marks. Queried about the Santos donation to Outspoken Middle East, Grinnell emailed Mother Jones a statement praising the work of the project and blasting the gay left, because whatever, for failing the gay community with their anti-American campaigns in West Hollywood and Chelsea. All right, very specific. He acknowledged that Santos is a liar, but Grinnell did not reply to a list of questions regarding his relationship to Santos. When Santos won the election in November, Grinnell celebrated, tweeting, "Historic!" And then using his Twitter handle there, Santos for Congress becomes the first openly gay Republican to win a congressional seat. All others came out after elected. Oh, okay. Interesting. It took too long to reach this moment, but big congratulations to George. This one-time acting head of U.S. intelligence has not tweeted about Santos since. And too bad he didn't get any intelligence on George Santos before he got connected with him. But he was never doing the job at the DNI either, so you can't expect him to actually also be any good at it in his regular personal life or his personal political life either. So there you go. That's another story about George Santos and what a fraud he is. Okay? So I told you I was going to do that, and now I have. All right, let's see. Why is this marked? This doesn't seem like something I actually need in Pocket. Let's get rid of it and get it out of the way here. Okay. So let's see. I mentioned to you also that things were getting weird and fashy down in Florida. Perhaps, maybe I'll hold on to that for the other side of the break and then do a bunch of those stories together. And I've got some other things, a few more minutes than timing is a little odd. So, all right, well, I'm trying to line things up correctly. Let's see, shall we go here instead? Why not? How about, that's all very fashy stuff, and maybe I can hold it all together. There is and this one is a long read too. There's a very weird mix of stories today. All right, why don't we'll roll a little further back and do a couple of smaller bore stories here. I don't know, some things that I parked in Pocket a couple of days and in some cases a couple of weeks ago that I thought were interesting for no reason other than it told us bad things about bad people that you don't like and that are awful. And in this case, that person is Nick Fuentes, who everybody realizes is a Nazi bastard. And when terrible things happen to him, it's very good news. I'm going to click through this because it's the Daily Beast just to see Jake LaHoot. I don't know how he pronounces L-A-H-U-T. There's no capital H in that. So I'm not real sure. But he's got the story. And congratulations to him. Sometimes they don't identify it right in the Pocket version, but they have it right here. The real reason Nick Fuentes was put on the no-fly list. I didn't know that Nick Fuentes was on the no-fly list. That's a good idea, I think, generally speaking. But like with most things, I just saw another thing. So, oh yeah, right. One of the Republicans were running around in email with one of their stupid grifter scams saying, you got to help out this one Republican guy. He was sentenced to prison for carrying a flag. Can you believe it? This is outrageous. Liberals have gone crazy sentencing people to prison for carrying a flag. And then, if you read the story or read a real version of the story of what happened here, I love when this stuff happens. Well, yeah, it was a flag. It was a Confederate flag, for one thing, not an American flag. And he was carrying a flag, right? But still, you can't go be sentenced to prison for carrying a Confederate flag, as offensive as that is, right? Well, he was carrying it in the Capitol on January 6th, which he had, bashed his way into and was part of the insurrection trying to obstruct the counting of the electoral vote. And that's what he was convicted of. He also had a Confederate flag, but they were trying to raise money on, look at this, liberals are sending, so these sorts of things. Here's Nick Fuentes on the no-fly list, and similarly going to the press and saying, this is because of my conservative politics, which isn't what he practices. Of course, he's a Nazi and a racist, and that's what his big problem is, but that's probably not why he's on the list. And as it turns out, no, not really. White nationalist Nick Fuentes claimed in 2021, and I missed the whole thing, that he was put on the TSA's no-fly list as a victim of, quote, overt political persecution. Around the same time, he bragged that the federal government froze one of his bank accounts containing a sum in the, quote, six figures range. He loves to talk about how persecuted he is, but the 24-year-old Holocaust denier's version of events doesn't hold up to much scrutiny. I can't believe it. Documents obtained by the Daily Beast show Fuentes, one of the key figures in the build-up to the Capitol riot, misled his supporters over why he was banned from flying on commercial airlines, as well as why he received a letter from the Department of Justice notifying him that his assets were seized and subsequently unfrozen, on the ground that they contained proceeds of money laundering, wire fraud, and threat violations. But the real story of how Fuentes ended up on the no-fly list wasn't because of his far-right and anti-Semitic beliefs, though that would have been fine in my view, nor his refusal to comply with any masking rules at the time. I guess he was thinking that that might be the issue, but it goes a little deeper than that. Let's roll the music and see if we can get through it. Instead, the podcaster who dined with Donald Trump and Kanye West, remember that? He brought him there, at Mar-a-Lago just before Thanksgiving last year, stepped on a rake when he sued the TSA, America's most loathed security agency, had the receipts. In court documents first mentioned by the left-wing news site The Gray Zone, the TSA reported they banned Fuentes from flying because he posed a safety risk to crew members, and let's tell you after the break exactly what that threat was. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Wasn't you like that cliffhanger? I engineered that perfectly. Now I'll tell you the real reason Nick Fuentes was put on a no-fly list. I left off in mid-sentence in order to preserve the suspense. As I was saying, in court documents first mentioned by the left-wing news site The Gray Zone, not really familiar with them, the TSA reported that they banned Fuentes from flying because he posed a safety risk to crew members. How so? Well, let's start with the fact that he threatened to strangle flight attendants. That's the issue. All right. It wasn't his conservative politics or his anti-Semitism or his refusal to comply with the mask mandate. It was the death threats. That'll probably do it. Now that's beginning to make sense. Among the evidence submitted to the court was a clip from Fuentes' own podcast where he laid out a very specific scenario involving a flight attendant who asked him to put his mask on. The incident went far beyond any normal venting about the modern American commercial flight experience. And the quotes from the podcast, let me tell you, I'm going to land, and then I'm going to get in the airport parking lot, and I'm going to wait for you. And then I'm going to put a mask over your face, your mouth and nose, Fuentes recounted on his show 2 days before the January 6th insurrection. And that's not so bad. I mean, in a way, it's obviously a threat, but I'm going to put a mask over your face. No, yeah, I know, but then that's okay. I wear one all the time when I work, and you can breathe just fine through it. But you still need to be wearing the mask, even if you can't breathe, Fuentes continued, making a strangling gesture on camera before adding a quick, kidding. So that's the idea, of course. Sir, could you please put on your mask? I'm not going to put on my mask. I can't breathe when I have my mask on. Well, that's the regulation. You're going to have to follow it. Everybody can breathe through it. It's just fine. Well, how would you like it if you couldn't breathe? I'm going to wait in the parking lot, and I'm going to do something to you so that you aren't able to breathe, and then we'll see how you like it. That's not going to go over very well. It's not the worst and most direct threat I've ever heard. That's true. But I guess if you throw that all in the pot along with, he's one of those anti-Semitic Proud Boy type street fighter weirdos who loves to get arrested, I would say, maybe this is kind of something to worry about. Threatening a flight attendant is a felony, of course, and can carry a sentence of up to 20 years in prison, and they should just go and do that, I think. Part of Attorney General Merrick Garland's November 2021 zero-tolerance order for prosecutors to shift from seeking fines to charging unruly passengers under federal law, though each offense still carries a $37,000 civil fine. This is all part of Attorney General's new plan. Under FAA regulations, no person may assault, threaten, intimidate, or interfere with a crew member in the performance of the crew member's duties aboard an aircraft being operated. Before his Twitter account was shut down, and who knows whether it's back again or not, Fuentes tweeted about a December 2020 incident in which he refused to pull his mask up to cover his nose and then got into a verbal altercation with a flight attendant. Because why not? It gets you in the newspapers, and like I said, he loves fighting and getting arrested, so what does he care? Fuentes tweeted that the flight attendant had the plane returned to the gate because of Fuentes' quote, attitude. I got up and I looked him in the eyes and I said, hey, F you, he tweeted. Woo, he told that guy. According to Fuentes, the flight attendant told Fuentes to enjoy his time in Chicago, the city they were supposed to be departing from. Yeah, eat crap, Fuentes said. He responded, wow. Well, he didn't get thrown off that flight after all because of how poignant his commentary was. Born in 1998, such a youngster, 8 years after I graduated from college. Unfortunately, somebody decided to give birth to Nick Fuentes. He has since made a name for himself in Gop politics by trying to mainstream anti-Semitic and white nationalist views within the party. One of his initial claims to fame dating back to 2019 when he managed to shut down a book tour event for Donald Trump Jr., yeah, I remember this now. By mobilizing his supporters to heckle the former president's son. His supporters, who call themselves Groypers, named after a more portly Jabba the Hutt-esque version of Pepe the Frog. Okay. A galvanizing meme on the extreme right, which I guess tells you where their heads are at, in the late 2010s, were among those arrested at the Capitol riot with known affiliations to hate groups. While the real reason Fuentes found his way onto the no-fly list was a lot less political than he initially presented to his fans, Fuentes has appealed the decision. Unfortunately for him, he missed the deadline to appeal the initial decision by 3 days, according to the TSA's motion to dismiss, noting that he had 60 days to appeal the no-fly list order that was issued on March 11th, 2022. A letter obtained by the Daily Beast from the Department of Justice in July of 2021 informed Fuentes that a Bank of America account would be unfrozen after the DOJ looked at the funds on the ground that they contained proceeds of money laundering, wire fraud, and threat violations. Unfortunately, they unfroze it, and, I'll bet they probably did contain proceeds of money laundering, wire fraud, and threat violations, but they, they'll say, well, we just didn't have solid enough a case, and what can you do? Maybe they didn't. The House January 6th committee subpoenaed Fuentes' white nationalist colleague Patrick Casey over more than $500,000 in Bitcoin payments from a French programmer shortly before his death ahead of the Capitol riot. Following the insurrection, Fuentes told his fans to, quote, probably destroy your phone, your SIM card, all that information if they were at the Capitol that day, before later saying, don't do that for my legal sake. I was just told I actually gave you terrible advice. Fuentes did not return a request for comment on the TSA lawsuit or whether the Bank of America account included any donations from supporters or Bitcoin transfers. So now you have, I don't know. It's an interesting story. I'll make a note to myself and see if I can find that one about the Confederate flag things. As I recall, I saw it in email, and it might have been coming from like Larry Klayman, the weirdo jackass Republican operative. I'm sure I deleted it. And now I'm on a kick now of deleting junk email where I used to just let it sit, and I really need to go back and scrub it all out. But I knew it would one day come back to haunt me. Now I'm sorry I deleted it because I'd be able to point to an example, but it would be an email. I don't know. I'm sure it's online somewhere. I'll see if I can find it. If not, if you care, look it up. I mean, I guess there's that. Scott could probably look it up and could find such a story for you, but why would I want to make him do that? I can't imagine a worse use of anybody's day. All right, so let's see. Now we're back in one of the longer segments, and we can get to a couple of the longer stories and the themes that I wanted to sew together. Why don't we try that? And we can talk about the fashy stuff that's going on in Florida and that you ought to be aware of. Let's see. I'll start with the news that was making the rounds yesterday afternoon that seemed a little weird, and of course was being billed under headlines that didn't quite, I mean, you can never fit the whole story in a headline, so there's always something missing. So the story turns out to be slightly, but only ever so slightly different from the sensationalist headline, and still no good, but I think this is a local source down in Florida, News Channel 8. Would I like to have them send me notifications for the latest news and updates? No. Thank you very much. I'll get it from someplace closer to home. But this is the news that I want from you now. Florida bill would require bloggers who write about the governor to register with the state. That's a new one. And I did see it very cleverly pointed out on social media that this was a fairly significant violation, it would appear, of First Amendment rights. And just try getting people to register their firearms with the state, and they will tell you, no, Second Amendment. But you're now supposed to register with the state if you blog about the governor. Sure. That's no kind of violation. Well, okay, like I said, there was a little bit more information about it here. We'll read the article. It doesn't make it good. It just makes it less broad and it's still crazy sounding. I mean, there's really no way to excuse this. Sam Sachs's article, that's a CHS in case you're wondering, begins this way. Florida Senator Jason Brodeur of Lake Mary, a Republican, Brodeur, if you're concerned that he might be your local representative, wants bloggers who write about Governor Ron DeSantis, Attorney General Ashley Moody, and other members of the Florida Executive Cabinet or the legislature, like him, to register with the state or face fines. All right, there's a little bit more to it. Brodeur's proposal, Senate Bill 1316, information dissemination, would require any blogger writing about government officials to register with the Florida Office of Legislative Services or the Commission on Ethics. Okay, still pretty draconian, right? In the bill, Brodeur wrote that those who write, quote, an article, a story, or a series of stories about, quote, the governor, the lieutenant governor, a cabinet officer, or any member of the legislature, and receives or will receive payment for doing so. Okay, slightly different, but still. Must register with state offices within 5 days after the publication of an article that mentions an elected state official. It's still a pretty significant and facial First Amendment violation, it seems, in my view. If registering your guns is supposedly now being held as a Second Amendment violation, this certainly should be too, but you never know with these judges that we have these days, et cetera, et cetera. So, as I said, there was some information that, all right, well, there's a little more information. Okay, if you're paid, although that's, one, that's easily disputed, and two, what do you mean getting paid? Like, am I getting paid to broadcast this show? The answer is no on several fronts. We're not broadcasting. Gotcha. Getting paid? Yeah, sorta. I mean, not like a regular salary thing, but I mean, people are contributing. There's support, financial support. Absolutely. I read the names of the people who do it. I'm more open than many political organizations are, I guess, about that. Even though I'm often saying, yes, and there's some contributions coming in from, whatever, Chicken Little 69 at whatever. Sure. Okay. But still, would that count though as getting paid? Like, I'm sure they have in mind, George Soros is sending you, or maybe George Santos for that matter, is sending you hundreds of thousands of dollars, big checks to be a liberal liar or whatever. But it could easily be just small donations. I don't know. I'm sure they'll throw the book at anybody who writes things they don't like, and they will conveniently overlook the non-registration of people that they do like. And at any rate, obviously, an unwise premise to begin with. And then it says, if another blog post is added to a blog, the blogger would then be required to submit monthly reports on the 10th of each month with the appropriate state office. They would not have to submit a report on months when no content is published. For blog posts that, quote, concern an elected member of the legislature or, quote, an officer of the executive branch, monthly reports must disclose the amount of compensation received for the coverage, rounded to the nearest $10 value. If compensation is paid for a series of posts or for a specific amount of time, the blogger would be required to disclose the total amount to be received upon publication of the first post in said series or time frame. I mean, it's totally unworkable. In any way, I think that's consistent with the First Amendment. But just wanted to, bring it to your attention. This is the kind of dumb stuff that they're actually trying to get away with. And it's just a bill, but you really shouldn't be proposing this at all, quite honestly. Additional compensation must be disclosed later on. Failure to file these disclosures or register with state officials, if the bill passes, would lead to daily fines for the bloggers, with a maximum amount per report, not per writer, of $2,500. The per day fine is $25 per report for each day it's late. The bill also requires that bloggers file notices of failure to file a timely report, the same way that lobbyists file their disclosures and reports on assessed fines. Fines must be paid within 30 days of payment notice unless an appeal is filed with the appropriate office. Fine payments must be deposited into the Legislative Lobbyist Registration Fund if it concerns an elected member of the legislature. For writing about members of the executive branch, fines would be made payable to the Executive Branch Lobby Registration Trust Fund, or if it concerns both groups, the fine may be paid to both related trust funds in equal amounts. Explicitly, the blogger rule would not apply to newspapers or similar publications under Brodeur's proposed legislation, trying to escape First Amendment that way. In addition to the blogger regulations, the bill also removes provisions of state statutes to require judicial notices of sales to be published on publicly accessible websites, and specifies that a government agency can publish legally required advertisements and public notices on county sites if the cost is not paid by or recovered from an individual. I don't really know what that's about, but should the bill pass, it would take effect immediately on approval. So that's the battle going on. If you're a local Floridian and you say, hey, my local representative sucks and I don't like what he's doing and I oppose him and I'm going to vote for someone else, or I think you should too. Apparently now you have to register with the state, and I'm sure they'll use that information discreetly and wisely. So that's pretty fashy. It's true. And it's, well, only part of a number of things happening in Florida and elsewhere that are rather concerning. Where was this one? Is this a Talking Points memo has this one. Let's see if it's accessible directly or whether it's one of the paywalled pieces. DeSantis, that's the governor of Florida, appears to be building his own Trumpian media circuit. And there's also commentary on this subject. I believe it's probably the same subject in the Columbia Journalism Review. So maybe, it depends on how long the piece is, but perhaps both perspectives might help clear things up. What's going on here? Kayla Philo has filoed this piece for TPM. Governor Ron DeSantis is taking another page out of Donald Trump's playbook for his burgeoning presidential campaign, harnessing his own media echo chamber. How so? A recent investigation from Grid found that a handful of local right-wing websites have managed to get exclusive access to the governor's administration, while DeSantis himself evades and even threatens the rights of the mainstream press in his state. For example, one of the publications, the Florida Standard, was the first news outlet to acquire the syllabus to the AP African American Studies course that the DeSantis administration loudly rejected back in January. The story was promoted by DeSantis aide Christina Pushaw. That's the one I was thinking of yesterday, who I heard was out as official spokesperson, but must be either in some other official role, perhaps with the Florida government, or perhaps just in his campaign office. So she's not gone. She may have changed roles. Anyway, like I said, the story was promoted by DeSantis aide Christina Pushaw, who tweeted it out from her to her 279,000 Twitter followers. The website is also less than a year old, with a masthead of 5 staffers in total. Will Witt, W-I-T-T, its founder and editor-in-chief, only lists a position as a social media manager for the right-wing propaganda outfit PragerU. Remember Prager University? PragerU on his LinkedIn before he reportedly launched the Standard last summer. That was his only job, I guess, before this. A handful of local news websites with a right-wing bent have popped up recently. The Florida Standard, Florida's Voice, and Florida Media Integrity are all less than 2 years old, as Grid noted. Some of the journalists behind the new publications told Grid that they had become acquainted with DeSantis over the years. Javier Manjares, who launched the Floridian in 2017, said that he launched the website after years of, quote, friendly interviews with the governor for another website. He also claimed that the outlet's DeSantis boosterism is less about him than their web traffic. He makes news almost every day or every other day, and everybody knows that. Everyone knows that. He told Grid, we write fairly about him. We try not to make it about pushing his agenda. Well, we'll see. DeSantis has had a largely antagonistic relationship with the press for years, and it's only disintegrated further in recent weeks as he pushes legislation that threatens journalists' rights in Florida. Last month, the Republican-led state house introduced a bill seeking to roll back legal standards put in place to protect news media covering government officials. And now, of course, his attack on bloggers. And he gears up for as he gears up for an expected run for the 2024 presidential election, he's mostly avoided interviews with mainstream media outlets, but still manages to make headlines by pushing outrage-inducing policy proposals. It's all seemingly part of a broader effort to boost his standing among MAGA Republican voters ahead of the presidential election, where he will likely challenge Donald Trump for the Gop nomination. It's a smart strategy for him right now. New Hampshire-based Gop strategist Jim Merrill told the Tampa Bay Times his policy pronouncements and other avenues to communicate a message. I think it's an effective way for him to stay in front of mind for voters before he's even campaigning. But while he's mostly iced out long-standing Florida papers like the Tampa Bay Times or the Miami Herald for sit-down interviews, he had an exclusive chat with the Florida Standard. I have a state to run. I've got a lot of stuff on my plate. I've got a family. I've got a lot of things. I've got to pick and choose what I want to do, he told Witt, the editor-in-chief. And I think there's a lot of corporate media outlets in this country that are just dedicated to pursuing partisan narratives and trying to smear people who dissent from those narratives. They then discussed how, quote, successful his administration had been and how Florida is, quote, doing better than most other states. All right. So that's just the start. Let me see what Columbia Journalism Review has to say about this. I think I parked it nearby. There we are. Florida's Blueprint for America's Media. Let's see what this is about. Kyle Pope wrote this. And now I have to get rid of this pop-up ad. All right. We'll get it out of the way. As I mentioned, Columbia Journalism Review. Let's take a quick look here. In a new book, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, lays out the case for the future of America can be seen in his state. He says so right in the title, The Courage to be Free, Florida's Blueprint for America's Revival. Very campaign-y title. If he's right, he's not. But if he's right, American newsrooms have reason to be very nervous, and they still do have that reason, even if he isn't right. In the race for the Republican nomination for president, DeSantis is widely expected to run against Donald Trump, who, both as a candidate and in office, made antipathy towards the press a central tenet of his politics. Perhaps in an attempt to differentiate himself from his Florida neighbor, or as part of a wider ploy to show he's Trumpier than Trump, DeSantis is doubling down on press threats to an extent never before seen in a presumed major party candidate. Some of DeSantis' anti-media ploys are old favorites, like stonewalling public records requests and bullying reporters who write articles that he doesn't like. Trump did these things too, but in a sense, DeSantis is playing the bad cop to Trump's pick-me approach, in which he seemed to grant reporters nearly unlimited access, even as they publicly pilloried their employers. That's true. DeSantis, by contrast, largely shut out the mainstream media during his re-election campaign in Florida last year. One of those things that people used to say, well, you can't get elected if you do that. And, well, we find that that's not true anymore. DeSantis is a dangerous person in more insidious ways, too. I don't know. I inserted that he was a person there for some reason. It's just DeSantis is dangerous. Last month, according to a report in Politico, he urged Florida's Republican-controlled state legislature to consider a slate of breathtaking anti-press measures. The proposals go beyond the usual efforts to gut libel laws, including lowering the threshold for when a, quote, public figure can sue a media outlet. In a serious threat to investigative reporting, Florida's legislature is now looking at a provision to specify that comments made by anonymous sources in news stories would be presumed false for the purposes of defamation lawsuits. So when you're going to enter testimony into the record, or you're making claims that a newspaper has defamed you, they're instructing the courts that you must tell the jury that you should assume that if a corroborating comment that would otherwise exonerate a newspaper from a defamation claim was offered anonymously, you're actually supposed to instruct jurors to assume that it's false, so that therefore it can't be used to bolster your claim. Your newspaper said I was laundering money. All you have as evidence is anonymous sources who say I saw this person launder money. That's actually a truth defense, but they're saying it should not be available to you because the quotes were offered anonymously, even if the editor of the paper was informed under proper procedure of who the source actually was, and then approves going ahead and using the quote but protecting their identity. All right, well, that's an interesting twist. The Miami Herald and the Tampa Bay Times, covering the legislation, wrote that it's reasonable to assume that any anti-press legislation will leach out of Florida. Given the governor's clout in Tallahassee, it stands a solid chance of passage this spring. The Tampa Bay Times and Miami Herald, I guess, wrote. It stands a solid chance of passing in the spring in the Republican-controlled state legislature and would likely spur more defamation cases in Florida, legal experts say. Because of the clear-cut constitutional questions, the legislation could eventually be appealed all the way to the United States Supreme Court, where at least 2 justices have already signaled that they are interested in revisiting libel law and press protections. Ironically, this is in some way a delicate dance for DeSantis, who has squandered an antipathy. Well, he'll probably squander too, but who has squared an antipathy for the mainstream media with a public embrace of Fox News. Fox, as I wrote last week, is now fighting a defamation suit, interestingly enough, in which its primary defense is rooted in the very legal framework that DeSantis is hoping to weaken. DeSantis seems happy to present himself as a practitioner of journalism, at least a memoir, as he promotes his book, which was published by a unit of Rupert Murdoch's empire. In a review in the New York Times, Jennifer Szalai, Szalai, sorry, Jennifer, noted this conflict and was otherwise scathing of the book, writing that although DeSantis' first book was weird and esoteric enough to have obviously been written by a human, this one reads like a politician's memoir churned out by ChatGPT. Probably not surprising. Whether or not DeSantis ever gets the chance to take his Florida blueprint national, we are, in a sense, all already living in an increasingly Floridian media environment. In 2021, Bob Norman wrote for CJR that the state had become the right-wing media capital of the country. DeSantis has played a role in that dynamic. As Norman wrote, with reference to the thoughts of Bob Sutton, a local Republican activist, Sutton says conservative emigres also feel, quote, safe in South Florida as opposed to other more liberal metropolitan areas because of the political makeup of the state. While Florida is generally a purple state, it's blood red in terms of raw power, with a Trump-loving governor and Ron DeSantis, a pair of Republican senators, and a decades-long Gop-controlled legislature ruling its largely dysfunctional roost. DeSantis, in particular, has become a MAGA darling and much hyped 2024 presidential hopeful with an unofficial campaign slogan of Make America Florida. Based on a much propagated myth that the state was kept, quote, open during the pandemic. I guess that's, again, the foundation of his whole thing. Also, per Sutton, it's the good weather and low taxes. And what an irony it would be if the conservative media capital of America ends up as the nexus of the biggest threat to the country's press. Talk about the courage to be free. You can read Norman's piece here. It is linked. We have, in fact, made it to the end of this CJR piece. Stay tuned after this minute break. We'll be right back with more. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. So I did, during this break, I found the story of the person who was actually sentenced to 3 years in prison as part of the January 6th riot. There's lots of news stories, like straight up news stories about this guy and what he actually did and why he was sentenced. But yeah, I didn't come up with the scammy email about, claiming, he's been sentenced for carrying a flag. But that's kind of, you've seen such things. You probably don't need to see proof that a Republican grifter scumbag somewhere kind of lied half-assed about what actually happened in order to try to raise money for his organization. I don't know if these are still things that people consider or require seeing a link for anymore. But okay. Anyway, let's see. Other stories that I wanted to connect with the fasci happenings in Florida and in Texas are still floating around here. Let's see. We also have this bit here. I'm just sort of checking against how many other things do I want to include on this thing. All right. This moving over to Texas. And in order to move over to Texas, moving over to Rolling Stone, where Nikki McCann Ramirez has this piece, get the pop-ups out of the way, and 16 other pop-ups. Oh, wow, the whole full screen thing promoting a Amazon movie of some kind or another. Anyway, the point is, Rolling Stone is reporting that in Texas, another weird, wacky legislative effort. We'll see whether it goes anywhere or not, but it's, a messaging bill of sorts, I guess, for the Republican Party. Texas Gop bill gives tax cuts, that's not surprising, to heterosexual parents. Yeah, I guess they're sort of limiting it just a little bit here. Listen to the gist of this program here. A new proposal would give massive breaks to large families, but only if the parents are straight, property owners, and who've never been divorced. That's an interesting set of requirements. All right, we're going to have to switch back to the pocket version of this one. A newly introduced Texas House bill proposes property tax cuts for couples who get married, stay married, and have lots of children. There's a catch, though. In order to qualify for the tax benefit, couples need to be heterosexual, never divorced, and their children born or adopted after the date of marriage. LGBTQ couples, single parents, divorced parents, blended families would not qualify for full benefits. HB 2889 would provide qualifying couples with a 40% property tax reduction if they have 4 children, with the tax breaks increasing for every additional child. Couples with 10 or more children would pay no property tax at all. Just getting started, a couple that meets the requirements laid out in the bill gets a 10% reduction even before they have any children. Well, in their view, they say this about it: supporting Texas means supporting Texas families, said Representative Brian Slayton, who introduced the bill. Texas will start saying to couples, I'm going to drop all the G's off of the end of these things, saying to couples, get married, stay married, and be fruitful and multiply. I don't know. That might not even be a Texas accent. I can't tell. Supporting in Texas means supporting families. Families are the building blocks of society. We must support families by making it easier for them to have and raise kids. Of course, having kids is as simple as it always was, and as you might have heard by now, there's a bit of natural incentive built into the program as it is, but they're going to add a tax cut as well. God's plan, as they would have it, for God's plan for having babies just ain't good enough no more. We need the state to be giving some tax benefits to people in order to get them to, all right, and that's the end of the tape on that. With HB 2889, Texas will start saying, get married, stay married, and be fruitful and multiply. Okay, but the bill won't be supporting all Texas families. I mean, I think we've already made this point, but here we go. And they won't be supporting all Texas families and children, just the ones deemed morally acceptable by the state's Republican Party. In his press release outlining the contents of the bill, Slayton suggested that the proposal had been modeled after laws implemented in Florida? No. Hungary and Poland. Oh boy, great models, which provide a virtually tax-free existence to large families. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's family policies were heavily promoted by Fox News' Tucker Carlson last year. So that's how the news reached Slayton, I'm sure. So Tucker Carlson now sort of a international clearinghouse for ALEC-type legislation. If it's happening in Viktor Orban's Hungary, it can happen in Texas, too. It can't happen here unless Tucker Carlson says, yes, it can, and in fact, it should. With both Texas's House and Senate under Republican control, the bill could gain traction, especially considering the state's status as a testing ground for pro-natalist Gop policies. Texas banned abortion in July of last year following the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and the state has attempted to implement several laws penalizing women who attempt to seek abortions and medical providers willing to assist them. The state's notorious bounty law, which preceded the Supreme Court striking down Roe, incentivizes citizens to sue anyone they suspect in aiding an individual in attaining an abortion. And really, should you even be bothering to incentivize that? I mean, they're already going to be paying at tax time, if they have an abortion. They want out of raising the children, and they're not going to get supported by this new tax scheme. And really, isn't that punishment enough? But apparently not. Concern over tax cuts has been brewing in the Texas State House for weeks now. State Democrats voiced concern that Governor Greg Abbott's proposed budget didn't take advantage of the state's immense budget surplus. We have a once-in-a-generational opportunity to make smart investments and strategic decisions, House Democratic Caucus Chair Trey Martinez Fisher told Spectrum News 1 earlier this month. Before we squander the funds on pet projects and tax cuts that don't touch everyone in Texas, we ought to fix the things that impact us all. That is what Texas Democrats want to do this session. We want to invest in Texas. But I guess investing in Texas is for the heterosexuals. I guess that's my Texas version of the whole. All right. Well, horrible as usual, but don't shoot the messenger. Shoot the people who wrote the stories that the messenger reads. I don't know. Don't shoot anybody, obviously. It's a bad idea. Just telling you what fashy things are going on out there. So, in a slight diversion from that, but also still kind of talking about fascist crap that Republicans are involved in, there are two reports. Let me take the New York Times version of it first, I think, because I think the CNN story is similar in nature. They were listed side by side somewhere when I was looking, and it's not clear that they are different stories. They may just be an additional version of it for backup. The New York Times version of it telling us, though, about what's going on in the stupid subcommittee about weaponization of government. It turns out that their Republican witnesses are not super great and on the up and up. Gop witnesses paid by a Trump ally, embraced January 6th conspiracy theories. Reads the headline in the New York Times. Democrats said a trio of witnesses billed as whistleblowers provided no evidence of wrongdoing, espoused false claims about the Capitol riot, and were compensated by an ally of former President Donald J. Trump. Not Donald F. Trump, the other former president. I love how they stick that in there. All right, well, anyway. Luke Broadwater, Adam Goldman, reporting the story. House Republicans have spent months promising to use their majority to uncover the insidious bias against conservatives on the part of the federal government, vowing to produce a roster of brave whistleblowers who would come forward to provide damning evidence of abuses aimed at the right. But the first three witnesses to testify privately before the new Republican-led House committee investigating the weaponization, in quotes, of the federal government have offered little first-hand knowledge of any wrongdoing or violation of the law, according to Democrats on the panel who have listened to their accounts. Instead, the trio appears to be a group of aggrieved former FBI officials, who, by the way, FBI officials not looking all that super great these days, as you know. But these three have trafficked in right-wing conspiracy theories, including about the January 6th Capitol attack, and received financial support from a top ally of former President Trump. The roster of witnesses, whose interviews and statements are detailed in a 316-page report compiled by Democrats, which means no one is reading it, that was obtained by the New York Times, suggests that Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio, the chairman of the panel, has so far relied on people who do not meet the definition of a whistleblower and who have engaged in partisan conduct that calls into question their credibility. And it raises questions about whether Republicans, who have said that investigating the Biden administration is a top goal, will be able to deliver on their ambitious plans to uncover misdeeds at the highest levels. Look out. So, by the way, no legislative agenda. Well, we're not going to do that. We're going to focus on proving the weaponization of government. Well, you suck and you can't do that either. Oh, well, that's too bad. But we are going to scream and get our picture in the paper. Each of these three witnesses endorses an alarming series of conspiracy theories related to the January 6th Capitol attack, the COVID vaccine, and the validity of the 2020 election. Democrats wrote in the heavily footnoted report, which cites scores of statements made by the witnesses. One has called repeatedly for the dismantling of the FBI, which, as it turns out, might not be terrible. Another suggested that it would be better for Americans to die than to have any kind of domestic intelligence program. The report also notes that the men are tied to far-right Republican operatives and former Trump administration officials who have an interest in promoting false claims about the January 6th attack and the Biden administration, while working to defend Mr. Trump, who is seeking a second term. The document centers on 3 men who have been interviewed by the panel's investigators: George Hill, a retired FBI supervisory intelligence analyst from the Bureau's Boston field office; Stephen Friend, a former special agent who worked in the Daytona Beach office; and Garrett O'Boyle, a special agent from the field office in Wichita, Kansas, who has been suspended. Other potential witnesses for the new subcommittee are FBI employees who were disciplined for attending protests on January 6th, according to Mr. Jordan. Well, they were rioters. Golly, maybe they're not the best witnesses. I mean, they're pretty good witnesses about what happened on January 6th, but they would be fairly biased and interested witnesses, not likely unbiased whistleblowers reporting for the FBI. Anyway, Mr. Friend, who resigned from the FBI, is part of a group of former agents who were placed on leave and called themselves the Suspendables. Ooh, that's rough. Anyway, in a letter sent last year to Christopher Wray, the FBI director of the group, claimed that the Bureau had discriminated against conservative-leaning agents. That's what they really hate there in the FBI. Mr. Hill has claimed on Twitter that the January 6th attack was a setup and that there was a larger hashtag Democrat plan using their enforcement arm, the FBI. He also described the FBI as the brown shirt enforcers of the DNC, making an apparent reference to Nazi stormtroopers to describe the federal law enforcement agency and its relationship to the Democratic National Committee. Sure, it's happening so much. For all the Democratic directors of the FBI that there have been, which, by the way, the number is 0, Mr. O'Boyle and Mr. Friend both testified that they had received financial support from Kash Patel, a Trump loyalist and former high-ranking official in the former president's administration. And didn't they want to make him some sort of intelligence chief in the closing days of the administration, too? And now he's just paying ex-FBI agents to come and give fake testimony about being whistleblowers on January 6th. Mr. Friend said Mr. Patel sent him $5,000 almost immediately after they connected in November of 2022, and that Mr. Patel has helped to promote Mr. Friend's forthcoming book on social media. See, I mean, again, we just don't get that kind of thing, at least not in my circles anywhere. I mean, I say it every time we do fundraising pitch and everything, as great as it is to get the small dollar donations from everybody, because I mean, I guess we wish that there were millionaires listening to the show and were like, yeah, I'll subscribe to the tune of $5,000 a month. Sure. Fantastic. This guy you just walk into a meeting, and it seems like on the right wing, and be like, I saw Joe Biden do a crime. Awesome. Here's $5,000. I mean, it just makes you wonder, what the hell are we doing trying to, do the right thing and tell the truth about things and investigate stuff and help people? There's no money in helping people. You want to hurt people? Here's $5,000. I don't know. I guess that's just the way it is. In a statement, Mr. Patel declined to confirm that he has provided financial support to the witnesses, but suggested that his organization has been focused on helping FBI employees facing retaliation for speaking out publicly. That's not a frequently heard of charity endeavor. I'm opening a charity that helps FBI employees who are being targeted for retaliation for speaking out publicly. I mean, if that was really what it was about, it wouldn't be a bad idea to have such a charity, but I don't know. It seems a little weird. Whistleblowers who provide credible information exposing government waste, fraud, and abuse, there's our favorite terminology, serve a critical role for constitutional oversight, but that's not what they're doing. Democrats said they produced their report after they learned that Republicans on the committee were planning to leak material from the transcribed interviews. It was written by Representative Gerald Nadler of New York, the top Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, and Delegate Stacey Plaskett of the Virgin Islands, the top Democrat on the Weaponization Committee. Oh, that's interesting, all by itself. Russell Dye, a spokesman for Mr. Jordan, said that Democrats were misrepresenting the testimony gathered so far to smear public servants who had come forward to expose wrongdoing. The public servants who had resigned from or been suspended by the FBI, of course. It is beyond disappointing, but sadly not surprising that Democrats would leak cherry-picked excerpts of testimony to attack the brave whistleblowers, because we were going to leak cherry-picked excerpts of the testimony, and they beat us to the punch. But they were doing it to say that the whistleblowers who risked their careers to speak out on abuses at the Justice Department and FBI weren't, in fact, on the up and up. That's what we don't like. All right. These same Democrats vowed to fight our oversight tooth and nail, and they are willing to undermine the work of the Congress to achieve their partisan goals. Well, they are members of Congress. They're not undermining the work of Congress. They're doing the work of Congress. The Democratic report includes excerpts from depositions and evidence of conspiratorial social media posts. It also details the ties between Mr. Trump's inner circle and the witnesses. For instance, Mr. Patel found Mr. Friend his next job. Here's $5,000 for you. Here's a new job for you. All right. Working as a fellow on domestic intelligence and security services with the Center for Renewing America, which is run by Russ Vought. That's a name we've heard a little bit in the last couple of weeks. The center is affiliated with the Conservative Partnership Institute, which is run by Mark Meadows, Mr. Trump's former chief of staff, and former Senator Jim DeMint of South Carolina. Based on this evidence, committee Democrats conclude that there's a strong likelihood that Kash Patel is encouraging the witnesses to continue pursuing their meritless claims and, in fact, is using them to help propel his vendetta against the FBI, Justice Department, and Biden administration on behalf of himself and President Trump, the report says. Of course, Kash Patel likely to be under investigation by the FBI, the Justice Department, and the Biden administration. So no wonder he has a vendetta against them. Republicans argue they received useful information from the men for their investigation. For instance, Mr. Hill told the subcommittee the FBI regularly conducted nationwide calls involving all 56 field offices after January 6th. Ooh, wow, they had calls. No wonder they wanted to hear from him. Mr. Hill described the calls as bordering on hysterical, according to excerpts from transcripts reviewed by the Times. Mr. Friend has been celebrated in conservative circles, with right-wing pundits seizing on his accusations as evidence of wrongdoing at the FBI, but those claims did not appear to hold up during his testimony. Mr. Friend has said he refused to take part in a SWAT raid of a January 6th suspect facing misdemeanor charges, which at the time he called an excessive use of force, to which he was a conscientious objector. On its face, that sounds like it might mean something there. The suspect, Tyler Bench, was accused of being a member of a right-wing militia group connected to the 3%er movement. Documents in Mr. Bench's case indicate that on January 6th, he posted a video of himself outside the Capitol wearing body armor and a gas mask and carrying an AR-15 style rifle. Under questioning, the committee said that Mr. Friend confirmed that ownership of a firearm, even without any additional factors, in fact, would be enough of a factor on its own to justify deploying a SWAT team in an arrest. Oh well. Well, I didn't want to, though. Mr. Friend also testified about being asked to surveil a person attending a school board meeting, touching on a claim promoted by Republicans that the government mistreated conservative parents. I guess I have a feeling this is going to end up like he was sentenced to jail for carrying a flag. I was asked to surveil a person attending a school board meeting. Yes, and it was, Yasser Arafat and Adolf Hitler's love child. Some people, maybe you want to surveil. Let's see. What's this all about? Maybe it's wrong. Maybe it was all terrible. Let's see. According to the report, though, Mr. Friend conceded during his interview that the man being tracked was also a 3%er who was under counterterrorism investigation. He was later arrested with Mr. Bench and 3 other individuals. So again, maybe there was something to it. Mr. Friend also engaged with Russian propaganda outlets while he was an FBI employee. Not great, the report noted, including being quoted extensively in an article in Sputnik, headlined, "Under Biden, Federal Agencies Turn into Instrument of Intimidation," FBI whistleblower says, and appearing for an interview with Russia Today, which you really can't do as an FBI employee. I mean, you can't do, I don't think you can do interviews that are unauthorized with any outlet, probably. The report cast doubt on the relevance of the witnesses' accounts. Democrats wrote that nothing in Mr. O'Boyle's testimony suggests misconduct at the FBI, and that Mr. Hill had made multiple claims about the FBI's handling of criminal investigations into the January 6th Capitol attack, despite having very little personal involvement in those investigations. The report also said that Mr. Hill had embraced a conspiracy theory that an Arizona man named Ray Epps was a federal informant who helped to instigate the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. Prominent Republicans, including Mr. Trump, have widely promoted the claim, which Mr. Epps denies, and the House January 6th committee determined to be unfounded. The witnesses also embraced the language and views of the right wing in many other matters. At one point during his testimony, the report said Mr. O'Boyle compared coronavirus vaccine mandates to a Polish reserve police unit during World War II that began as a group of, quote, just normal people, but ultimately, quote, were basically engaging in genocide like the rest of the Nazi regime. All right, whatever. That's actually the end of the piece here. There was, some corrections that are noted at the bottom. You don't need to know because they've been corrected and we read in the correct way. I mentioned that there was also a CNN article on this subject, and I just wanted to kind of check in on it and see whether, I guess this is really the same subject. This CNN piece is written by Annie Grayer and Elena Treen. The headline being, Jim Jordan's first FBI whistleblowers face scrutiny from skeptical Democrats. And I don't know. I'm guessing that goes over the same ground here, but with some slightly different angles. And I think they pick out a few different choice portions of the report, I would guess. But yeah, it's very interesting. And I guess here, the CNN article actually kind of does spotlight some slightly different pieces. So maybe as we are getting close to the break, we can fill in some gaps with what CNN had to report. In his quest to prove the federal government has been weaponized against conservatives, Republican House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan has touted the allegations of what he claims are dozens of whistleblowers, 3 so far, dozens who have come to his office with stories of discrimination and bias. While little is known about them, Jordan's reliance on these whistleblowers is already emerging as an early flashpoint, with Democrats raising questions about their legitimacy as actual whistleblowers and the relevance of their testimony. 3 of Jordan's witnesses have come in for private interviews with committee staff so far. None of them appear to have had their claims validated by any government entities that actually grant federal whistleblower protection, sources familiar with their testimony said. So they're self-appointed whistleblowers at this point. One who alleged there was FBI wrongdoing had their claims rejected. And that could happen, even to a legitimate whistleblower. Another is retired, and it's unclear whether he has firsthand knowledge of the violations he alleges. The third has not revealed his direct disclosures or FBI suspension notice to House Democrats, according to the transcripts reviewed by CNN. Separately, several other supposed whistleblowers who have not come in for interviews were also suspended from the FBI for being at the Capitol on January 6th, according to multiple sources familiar with the committee's work. This is a point Jordan has not shied away from, though, using the accounts of several whistleblowers, in his words, in a May 2022 letter to accuse the FBI of retaliating against employees for engaging in protected First Amendment activity on January 6th. Now they're back into the First Amendment again, not like they are in Florida. Jordan added in the letter that he had been told none of these whistleblowers were inside the U.S. Capitol, charged with any crime, or contacted by law enforcement about their actions. For more than a year, so everything's fine. For more than a year, Jordan has made whistleblower allegations a central part of his campaign to uncover what he claims is political bias inside the federal government, including drafting a 1,000-page report last year. And remember that it wasn't really, there weren't 1,000 unique pages. It was all just garbage over and over again. All of that reported last year, and that he leans heavily on claims by government employees alleging political interference by both the Justice Department and the FBI. That report and the groundswell among House Republicans helped lead to the creation of this committee. Democrats on the Weaponization Committee, already skeptical of its premise, are frustrated that many of the materials regarding these individuals has not been shared. And that's not a good approach to anything. While Democratic members and their staff have interviewed some of these people behind closed doors alongside their Gop counterparts, what they have learned so far has not been encouraging, Democrats told CNN. Who knows whether he has dozens? Who are these people? We haven't been given a list. What kind of credibility do they have? Representative Jerry Connolly, who serves on the subcommittee, told CNN. There's lots more. You should read their article. There's some interesting quotes from some of these supposed witnesses. But right alongside the New York Times piece, it does add a little extra color.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. You know, and checking in with the various social media sites to which we open ourselves up. The mighty OCD tells us, hey, don't forget us in Tennessee. All right, I won't forget you fascist bastards in Tennessee. Of course, the freedom fighters like mighty OCD down in Tennessee. You're quite right. Tennessee, too, I think should be rightly included on. And there are probably other states, too. But Tennessee really does deserve a place among the top three with Texas and Florida in terms of its Republican-controlled legislature passing particularly stupid legislation, or at least proposing particularly stupid legislation. And I don't have a raft of stories about Tennessee, but I encourage you to send me a couple. But I do have at least one. This just sort of proves the point. Like, off the cuff, he says, what about Tennessee? And I say, oh, yeah, you know, I got a Tennessee stupid bill sitting right here in pocket, ready to go. It's been waiting for a little while, but do you want to hear it? I mean, you already know it, but do you rest of you want to hear a stupid Tennessee story? I got one. Let's see. I better check my phone. I keep getting, the phone is ringing like crazy in the background, and you know I can't answer it, but I'm a little worried. But if there's anybody who really needed to reach me for an emergency, there are other ways, but I'm starting to get upset now. Anyway, here's what's going on in Tennessee. A Tennessee bill would allow law enforcement to carry guns while under the influence. Isn't that a great idea? Nothing like a drunk cop with a gun to keep you safe there in America. But because it's guns and cops and, hey, drinking too, I guess that's supposed to be what passes for a good idea in Tennessee. This is Action News 5 reporting action. This news. Action News, of course, is always acting. That's right. You see, Jacob Gallant, the acting reporter for Action News, I guess, says a bill proposed in the Tennessee Senate would allow law enforcement officers to carry guns even while under the influence. Senate Bill 827 was proposed by Senator Joey Hensley last month. He's a Republican of Hohenwald, Tennessee, in case you're just wondering, what is it my guy? Is it not? The bill states, as introduced, allows enforcement officers to carry a firearm when under the influence of alcohol or controlled substances of other kinds, interestingly enough, and certain other circumstances. The bill would allow people to carry firearms on higher education campuses and in parks, plus prohibits the carrying of weapons in K through 12 schools except by certain persons, including a person permitted to carry a firearm under federal law. It's a little bit of a mixed message there, but okay. The bill was referred to the Senate Judiciary Committee on February 6th. A similar bill was introduced in the House by Representative Todd Warner from Chapel Hill. House Bill 977 was introduced at the same time and assigned to the Civil Justice Subcommittee. That's all there is in terms of reporting on it, but you wanted a little piece of Tennessee news. That's pretty good. I understand, the interest in having law enforcement officers be allowed to carry their weapons if they're off duty or even if they're on the grounds of a school or someplace that previously federal law, for instance, tried to prohibit firearms, i.e. school zones, etc. But yeah, I guess they must have been running into situations where cops were, brandishing firearms while off duty and drunk, but allegedly for good reasons, and getting themselves in trouble because they were drunk, and you really shouldn't be doing that at any point, much less while you're drunk. And they must have decided, we want to remove that possibility of legal jeopardy. Why make cops shy about brandishing their guns when they're drunk just because they're drunk? Isn't everybody drunk most of the time after all? Come on, let's be honest, people. And I don't know. Not really sure what's motivating that one, but you wanted a story about Tennessee doing stupid fashy things. There's one that just, like I said, happened to be lying around. There's probably 10 more, and you can send them to me, and I'll probably share them over, over time anyway. Just, in case you were wondering, if Tennessee really is fashy like the rest of them, then almost certainly you would have a story lying around on a moment's notice, right? Sure. Well, there it is. We have one. Okay, speaking of other stories lying around and waiting to be shared with you, I have a brand new entry from Rosalyn MacGregor. This one not strictly about Michigan, but there's certainly a Michigan mention in it. And let's see, this one about the attempts to revive and therefore allow the passage of the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. Hasn't been on everyone's radar, but it did come up again a couple of, I would say probably a year or two ago, wasn't it? It seems like it was a while ago, when Virginia's state legislature, during the Democratic control of both houses, ratified the Equal Rights Amendment, and depending on, whose version of procedure you're more influenced by, either did it late or did it in valid fashion, and therefore the Equal Rights Amendment should be considered a valid and ratified part of the United States Constitution. But as Rosalyn will point out to you, you probably already know about the controversy surrounding this. But let's roll her report and listen. Well, what the hell? We'll listen to the whole thing, and it raises a lot of interesting questions and properly belongs on KITM.
Good morning, David. I'd like to draw your listeners' attention to the recent Senate hearing about removing the arbitrary deadline on adopting the Equal Rights Amendment. You may recall that the ERA was created 100 years ago and simply says equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. In 1972, the ERA passed the Senate and the House of Representatives with the required two-thirds majorities, but Congress put a 7-year deadline for ratification by the states. When it appeared 3/4 of the states would not approve the amendment, Congress voted in 1978 to extend the deadline by 3 more years. Unfortunately, only 35 of the 38 states needed approved the ERA before the time expired in 1982. In the 41 years since, 3 more states recently ratified the ERA, but 6 states voted to rescind their ratifications. Additionally, in 1992, Amendment 27 was added to the Constitution that was first presented in 1789, more than 200 years between suggestion and adoption. This set a nice precedent for the ERA. I'm quoting from an article in the Biblical Recorder, a publication for North Carolina Baptists. Quote, "The recent hearing presented testimony on a joint resolution that would retroactively eliminate the 1982 deadline and make the proposal a valid constitutional amendment approved by 3/4 of the states. Democratic committee members and their witnesses contended Congress has the power to take such a step, while Republicans and their witnesses assert it does not. Republicans and their supporters claim the ERA would vastly expand abortion rights, threaten religious freedom, and actually restrict some rights of females." Senator Lindsey Graham predicted failure for the effort. The ERA supporters are not starting over because if you started this process today, you wouldn't come anywhere near 2/3 of the House and Senate to ratify this amendment, Graham said. Times have changed. Women's rights have been acknowledged. The ERA would be soundly rejected because it would lead to chaos, he said. Senator Dick Durbin, committee chairman, said, "There is no room for uncertainty when it comes to protecting equal rights under the law. Sadly, that is a lesson driven home last year by the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. At the heart of this is the Dobbs decision and other decisions which relate to the rights and roles of women today," Durbin said. Republican witness Jennifer Braceras, director of the Independent Women's Law Center, told the committee the ERA would be devastating not only to women and girls, but also to religious liberty, threatening the tax-exempt status of religious groups that ordain only men and prohibit federal funding of religious organizations that counsel young people about biological sex differences. She pointed to the ERA's effect on women's and girls' sports. Males are currently able to compete on female teams in high school and college levels in some states. Braceras told the panel that, as a high school senior in Massachusetts, her daughter played field hockey against 3 teams that included boys. Elizabeth Price Foley, law professor at Florida International University and a GOP witness, said the ERA would mean more distinctions between men and women would be ruled unconstitutional than are currently. The difference between males and females regarding registration for selective service and the draft is the most obvious example, she said. Democratic witnesses and senators said the ERA is needed to eliminate ambiguity about women's rights. Democratic witness Kathleen Sullivan, a lawyer with a Los Angeles-based firm, said Congress has the power to remove the deadline that was set in 1972 and extended in 1978. The ERA deadline was in the resolution's preamble and not its text, she said. The preamble is advisory and states ratify the amendment text and not the preamble, Sullivan told the panel. The amendment would build into the Constitution a guarantee that women cannot be treated as lesser than men, that girls cannot be treated as lesser than boys, Sullivan said. The ERA is proper, it's constitutional, it's within this body's power, she told the committee. David, I had the opportunity to watch the hearing, and Senator Durbin said something to the effect that Republicans issued dire warnings about chaos in public restrooms if we expanded rights to LGBTQ people. Now we're being warned about chaos for everyone playing field hockey in high school. Bringing this back to Michigan, I'm proud to say that Senators Debbie Stabenow and Gary Peters are co-signers on the ERA joint resolution. That's all I have for you today. I'm Rosalyn MacGregor, your Michigan correspondent, signing off. Over to you, David.
All right, over to me. Thanks, Rosalyn. Speaking of the comments from Dick Durbin there, that, Republicans are warning of, dire consequences if you pass the ERA, just as they were once warning of dire consequences if you allowed people to use the bathroom that they wanted to use. That's the thing, of course. Republicans are always warning of dire consequences. I'm reminded when you said that of, it's not nearly the same subject, but I'm reminded of my favorite report that I keep around from my days on Capitol Hill when we were considering, or supposed to be considering, the Clinton-sponsored healthcare reform bills way back when in the early 1990s. And that was the Republican practice then. Why, if we have this, there'll be the collapse of the healthcare system, collapse of the world economy, collapse of everything, takeover by socialists, et cetera, et cetera. And that we were handed a report that this is just what Republicans do all the time. And just in terms of healthcare related stuff, for instance, when it was time to pass Medicare and Medicaid, they did the same thing. And here's a collection of quotes of Republicans speaking not only about the proposed healthcare reforms from the Clinton administration, but also for the Economic Stimulus Act that they, A, had proposed and B, did pass. And Republicans were on, the record is replete with Republicans screaming about the dire consequences. And instead, it launched like an economic boom that lasted a decade. It had its problems, no doubt, and the economic growth wasn't always in the right places and wasn't always focused on the right people or aimed in the right direction. But was it a dire collapse into grim Soviet-style socialism? No. It was not that, even though that was the threat. And likewise, we learned that in the 1960s, they said exactly the same thing about Social Security. And in the about Medicare and Medicaid. And in the 1930s, said the same things about Social Security. That's what Republicans do. They threaten dire consequences if a normal thing that is being proposed is allowed to pass, and then the thing passes and it's quite popular and actually helps a lot of people. They try to repeal it for a little while, and then they swear on a stack of Bibles that they were never about repealing it once it becomes too popular to touch. Okay, so thanks for that one, and good luck to people with the ERA, and they do make a good point about, why, we've learned 100 different ways that Congress can change the rules for itself and for either for its own benefit or in order to keep an effort alive at any point. And so why not this one too? And a good point about the time limit, one being arbitrary, and not every amendment offered for ratification even has a time limit. It's not clear that that's necessary. And two, that the time limit, to the extent that it exists at all, was in the preamble and not in the language of the amendment itself. Maybe that will hold some sway. Maybe not with the Supreme Court, but with a more reasonable one, possibly true. All right, let's see. So, other things to offer you in the last segment here. There are many. A couple I want to get to. One of which is an extraordinarily long read, it looks like. But maybe I can save that one for second, and if we don't make it to the end, we can assign it for reading for you for the weekend. But I feel like I want to share this one with you, which is sitting at the top of Pocket. From Aaron Rupar's Substack, we have Substack, which he calls Public Notice, by the way. This interesting piece, and he's speaking with Matt Gertz from Media Matters in this entry, and those are two people you should be listening to. You can hardly avoid hearing them on social media, but interesting to see them in Substack. And an interesting topic here for Fox, you remember them, January 6th was the cost of doing business. That's an interesting take on things. Matt Gertz on Rupert Murdoch's bombshell deposition. A slightly different take on the story we've covered so much already this week. The latest filing in Dominion voting systems, you know how much it is. The defamation lawsuit, everybody say it with me, $1.6 billion. All right, against Fox News, of course, reveals how Murpert Rudock, why not call him that? Muppert, he's a Muppet Rudock. That's a good nickname for him. Oh, that reminds me. Somebody's been trying to catch on a new nickname for Elon Musk, calling him, what was it? Oh, Phony Stark. I thought that was pretty funny too. but it's hard to say correctly without screwing it up. Just like Muppet Rudock, or whatever the hell I just call him. Okay, the latest filing in this suit reveals how Muppet looked the other way while Fox platformed lies about the 2020 election, lies that hardly anyone in the company actually bought, but even that wasn't nearly enough for Donald Trump. As details of the documents circulated earlier this week, Trump took aim at Murdoch for acknowledging in his deposition that hosts like Lou Dobbs, Maria Bartiromo, and Sean Hannity endorsed notions of a stolen election that Murdoch himself understood were false. Trump unloaded on the 89-year-old Fox Corporation chair for throwing his anchors under the table, by which he probably meant bus, but most things for Donald Trump are under the table, so he slipped and went that way instead, and also demeaned him as leader of a group of MAGA-hating globalist rhinos. Oh, by the way, Murdoch should sue Trump for defamation based on that. What the hell? Why not? Let's all get into the act. Do it in Florida, interestingly enough. Okay, well, anyway, he demeaned him as part of a group of MAGA-hating globalist rhinos who should get out of the news business as soon as possible because they are aiding and abetting the destruction of America with fake news. Those are the caps. That's my capital voice. There's thick irony in Trump's attacks, and Trump himself is also thick as well. I should point that out. That's because, contrary to being a Trump hater, one of the juiciest tidbits from Murdoch's depositions shows that he colluded with the Trump campaign by sharing confidential information about Biden's campaign ads with Jared Kushner. I learned about that nugget and others, including one about Fox's internal research department debunking lies about Dominion that nonetheless found their way into Fox shows, thanks to an illuminating Twitter thread from Media Matters senior fellow Matt Gertz. The first of which is embedded here and reads, Media Matters has obtained a copy of the latest Dominion filing featuring Rupert Murdoch's deposition and some light redactions from the court. I will be tweeting out snippets of this thread as I read through it. And I guess we'll get the highlights from Aaron Rupar's read of Matthew Gertz's Twitter thread. The big lie and Dominion's huge lawsuit over it has driven a wedge between Fox and Trump for now, but there's little reason to believe the network will do anything other than circle the wagons if he ends up being the Republican nominee for president. After all, the early months of Trump's 2016 run were low-lighted by a misogynistic feud with then Fox host Megyn Kelly that exploded during an August 2015 Fox News debate. Trump boycotted another Fox News debate a few months later, but that all became a distant memory as soon as he became the Republican nominee. But for us, of course, we remember it. That was the launching pad for his fake veterans fundraiser, which he paid for with his friend Stewie Rah-Rah's money, right? That's years ago. Anyway, after Trump defeated Hillary Clinton, Fox, of course, became an unofficial comms shop for his administration, regularly interviewing officials, including Trump himself, who drove ratings by making news on the network. In exchange, Trump got fawning coverage and ultimately inside information about Biden campaign ads. To get some expert perspective about Dominion's latest filing, I talked to Gertz, who's definitely not to be confused with Matt Gaetz, as we all know, about everything from the current Trump-Fox beef to what the Murdoch revelations can teach Democrats. I was heartened by Biden's refusal to do a Super Bowl interview with Fox News, Gertz said. I think that's the right call and has been absolutely vindicated by these filings, which show how deceitful Fox News is and that it's a fundamental political actor. A transcript of the conversation, lately edited, follows. We'll do that one. And yeah, the online meme of confusing Matt Gaetz with Matthew Gertz is a fun one. And I guess I could start a new one with Slotkin and what's her name? Stefanik. But that's actually a worse confusion because their names don't really sound all that much alike. So that's quite dumb, in fact. Anyway, so here's Aaron saying, we both watch a lot of Fox, so it's not like we needed these Dominion filings to understand that it's right-wing propaganda. But were you as surprised as me to learn that Rupert Murdoch colluded with Trump by sharing confidential information about the Biden ads with Kushner? Yeah, he says, that was the one revelation that really stunned me. We've been writing at Media Matters for years and years that Fox News is an extension of the Republican Party and willing to lie to their viewers for financial gain. So that's not terribly surprising, but the revelation about the ads is really something. What seems to have happened here is that the Biden campaign wanted to run ads on Fox News or perhaps on Fox-owned and operated broadcast stations. And when you do that, you need to turn over the ad to the network. The details are unclear, but it appears Rupert gave Jared some sort of preview of them. This obviously crossed a huge ethical red line, especially since these ads wouldn't go directly to Rupert Murdoch. He had to go and seek them out. I mean, that's a good point there, too. By the way, as I'm looking at the clock, I can see I'm not getting to the long read thing, which is something Scott sent me. Scott, you can feel free to include it in the roundup. It's actually quite interesting. I'll tease it a little bit. Perhaps we can discuss it next week, but everybody should maybe get a sneak peek at the thing and just be aware on background of what's going on. Anyway, back to this, because that's the decision we've made. Rupert is the head of the parent company, so he would have needed to go out and get them from whoever is actually in charge of the ads, then send them to Trump's son-in-law and the White House advisor, or he's Trump's son-in-law and White House advisor. That's a huge line to cross. It tells Democrats that if they in the future want to run ads on Fox News or Fox broadcast stations, they may be subject to the same treatment. Their opponents may end up getting a preview of those ads before they run and get a substantial political advantage. So obviously, that's a good point, right? You can't safely run ads on Fox or Fox-owned broadcast stations. Aaron continues now. Rupert Murdoch comes across as a rather unsympathetic character in all of this. According to his deposition, he didn't personally buy the big lie, and he took half steps to try to prevent it from spreading on Fox programming, but his efforts in this respect were unsuccessful. And at the same time, as we already talked about, Murdoch was colluding with the Trump campaign to defeat Biden. Is it fair to say he's trying to rewrite history? Gertz answers, I think he's motivated by money and power, and that at the end of the day, he didn't really care whether or not Fox News was putting out lies. Once the writing was on the wall about viewers fleeing the network because they were upset over it calling Arizona for Biden, they really dug in on promoting election lies they knew weren't true. At the same time, scattered throughout these filings, you have another story. That's Murdoch basically telling Suzanne Scott, the Fox News CEO, that the network needed to be working harder to elect Republicans to the Senate. Basically confessing very explicitly that for all intents and purposes, Fox News is a Republican propaganda outlet geared toward helping the party win elections. Aaron says, you've probably seen that Trump responded to the new Dominion filing by trashing Murdoch on Truth Social. He's also been publicly sour about Fox heavily promoting Ron DeSantis. How do you assess the Trump-Fox relationship at this point? Gertz says, we've seen this back and forth going on since 2015. You'd have these cases where Trump would see coverage that he didn't like and fly off the handle, but both sides would inevitably come back to each other again. Again, though, I think Rupert Murdoch likes money and likes power, and there's too much at stake for him not to get on board with Trump if he's going to be the nominee. DeSantis is the new flavor, and there's obviously a lot of interest in him at Fox. Based on the internal communications revealed in these filings, I think it's possible that there are folks there that at least at one point had big problems with Trump. But Trump and Fox have too much to offer one another for that rift to remain if Trump starts rising again. He'll be able to put pressure on Fox News and leave them at risk of seeing their viewers flee back to competitors. Aaron says, this might seem counterintuitive in light of all the bad press Fox is getting right now, but is it fair to say Murdoch is allowing the big lie to be spread on his network, or allowing it to happen actually worked out for him in the end? And I guess I won't get an answer because it says, I guess at this point it cuts us off and says, well, this post is for paid subscribers, which was a little sneaky and maybe something you should have said at the beginning, but too bad for me. I wonder, though, whether how robust is the paywall. I guess it's pretty robust because it cuts off in pocket too. So, okay, I guess if I had known that, I might have approached things slightly differently. But It being just before time for us to start considering playing our outro music, we can give some consideration to teasing the story that I told you I had in mind as Scott Anderson sent it to us. It's not off topic. It's just a long read on a narrow slice, but a narrow slice of something you should be aware of. It's a HuffPost report from Christopher Mathias, whose headline here reads, Exposed, Dallas Humber, I guess a name you should be making yourself familiar with, Dallas Humber, narrator of neo-Nazi terrorgram, promoter of mass shootings. Who is this person? A woman who of all you wouldn't be able to tell from the name Dallas Humber, but her propaganda, it says in the subheader here, canonized white supremacist murderers as saints. She may have helped inspire a shooting at a gay bar. Now she's been unmasked. Sort of a more dangerous than libs of TikTok person here, but I guess somebody else who should be singled out and at least watched closely, if not thrown under the bus, figuratively, if you believe I mean figuratively. But here you have it. And by the way, she the shooting that she apparently inspired is right up here at the top of the piece here on October 12th, 2022. And it's a foreign Slovakian name here. Juraj Krajcik. I have no idea how you pronounce this name. Used a laser-sighted gun to open fire outside a popular LGBTQ bar in Bratislava, Slovakia, killing 2 queer people and wounding a third. And then, I guess saying in his Twitter feed, feeling no regrets, isn't that funny? But then he killed himself a short time later, so maybe he did feel some regrets, or maybe it wasn't regret that motivated him. The 19-year-old had also tweeted a link to a 65-page screed he'd authored advocating the genocide of queer people, Jewish people, and black people. Krajcik mimicked and cited the writings of other white supremacist mass shooters, whom he referred to as saints. And in a special thanks section, he expressed gratitude for the online community that had radicalized him. You ask, where was he radicalized? The answer is the Terrorgram Collective. Krajcik wrote in italics for emphasis, you know who you are, building the future of the white revolution one publication at a time. It was the first time that the Terrorgram Collective, a neo-Nazi propaganda outfit that uses Telegram, an encrypted messaging app, to encourage acts of far-right terror and to celebrate the people who commit them, had been cited in a mass murderer's twisted treatise, and now we know who's behind it. You might want to read that over the weekend.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
We'll try and set some time aside next week, perhaps, to try and read through some of that if you don't do it on your own. But next, of course, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam, who has all sorts of information and stories to share with you, including this intriguing look at the Fox thing. Murdoch's Wu-Tang defense could go up in smoke. I'd like to figure out what that is. Stay tuned.